In the late 16th century, more than 100 English settlers vanished from Roanoke Island, leaving behind one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. This group of men, women, and children arrived in 1587 under the leadership of John White, hoping to establish the first permanent English colony in the New World. They came with dreams of prosperity, religious freedom, and a fresh start, far from the rigid structures of English society. But what happened after they set foot on that island remains a chilling question that has echoed through the centuries. When John White returned to the island in 1590, after a delay of nearly 3 years, he found the colony deserted. No people, no signs of struggle, no graves, and no clear evidence of where the settlers had gone. It was as if they had simply vanished into the forest, swallowed by the land they had once tried to tame. What made this disappearance so disturbing wasn't just the absence of people. It was the total lack of physical evidence. In a time when even the smallest of confrontations often left behind scars, broken tools, burnt-out structures, discarded belongings, Roanoke was eerily clean. The fort had been dismantled, the homes were gone. The only remaining clue was a single word etched into a wooden post. Croatoan. That word became both the heart of the mystery and its most maddening symbol. It suggested something, hinted at a direction, perhaps a destination, but it didn't explain anything. There was no indication of whether the settlers left by choice or if they were forced. No information about their weathering, and most importantly, no certainty about whether they had survived at all. This unexplained disappearance of an entire community was unprecedented. Colonial efforts had failed before, but never in such complete silence. Most failures left behind stories, survivors, or bones. Roanoke left behind only questions. The fact that no bodies were found, no letters were discovered, and no journal entries were recovered makes it feel as though history itself was interrupted, as if the narrative thread of the Roanoke settlers was simply cut mid-sentence. Their lives, their voices, their hopes disappeared without a trace. That erasure has haunted historians for centuries and continues to challenge every new generation of researchers who try to piece together what happened on that remote patch of land. At the heart of this key point is the emotional and psychological impact of total disappearance. It taps into something primal, our fear of being forgotten, of vanishing without explanation. The settlers were real people, fathers, mothers, children, builders, farmers. They had names and dreams, and yet they are now known only as the Lost Colony. Their individual stories, washed away by time and mystery. Their complete erasure speaks to the vulnerability of human efforts against the vast forces of nature, conflict, and cultural misunderstanding. Roanoke is not just a footnote in a history book. It is a haunting absence that forces us to confront how easily the past can be swallowed, how fragile our attempts at permanence really are. This mystery also highlights the failure of communication between worlds. The settlers may have encountered challenges with local tribes, disease, starvation, or internal dissent, but none of those possibilities left a record. The lack of clues means we may never understand whether the tragedy was due to environmental hardship, human error, or external threat, and so the story remains stuck in a liminal space. A story with a beginning, but no middle or end. For over 400 years, it has invited wild speculation and imaginative reconstruction, but it has not given up its truth. That vanishing continues to shape our cultural memory of early America, not as a tale of triumph, but as a quiet, unresolved loss. What happened to the settlers of Roanoke? That question is as compelling today as it was in 1590. It's not simply about where they went, but how they could disappear so completely, leaving behind a land so full of questions and so empty of answers. Their story, or lack of it, challenges our sense of historical control and reminds us that even in a world obsessed with records and evidence, some things may always remain unknowable. Their disappearance was not just physical. It was the vanishing of hope, history, and humanity in one silent sweep of time. The lone word Croatoan, carved into a weathered post, stands as one of the most perplexing and haunting clues in the history of early American colonization. When John White returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, he was desperate to find the settlers he had left behind 3 years earlier, including his own daughter and infant granddaughter. What greeted him instead was a barren site, stripped of its inhabitants and signs of life. Amid the eerie quiet, the word Croatoan appeared. No context, no message, just 5 letters etched into wood. It wasn't scrawled in panic or carved hastily, suggesting it may have been meant as a deliberate signal. But what did it mean? Was it a final message from the colonists pointing to where they had gone? Or was it a warning, a clue to their demise, or something else entirely? Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, as well as the name of the Native American tribe living there. It led many to believe that the settlers may have moved there willingly, perhaps in hopes of surviving by aligning with local tribes. John White had hoped to sail there immediately after the discovery of the carving, but fierce storms and the urgency of returning to England prevented him from ever searching the location. Thus, the one tangible lead was never followed at the time it mattered most. Over the centuries, the carving of Croatoan has become more than a clue. It has become a symbol of historical uncertainty. It represents that narrow moment when resolution was just within reach, but never pursued. The idea that the colonists might have survived, integrated, or even thrived under a new identity has long fascinated scholars and dreamers alike. Still, the word also raises uncomfortable questions. If they did go to Croatoan Island, why didn't they send someone back to leave more explicit messages? Why was there no second sign, no further detail? If they were safe and thriving, why didn't they ever make contact again? Or did they try, and were their efforts erased by time and conflict? The carving offers just enough information to spark theories, but never enough to confirm any of them. Over the years, it has been interpreted as a place name, a message, even a desperate cry. Yet in all its possibilities, it stands alone, silent and unyielding, a ghostly voice from the past refusing to explain itself. This solitary clue has inspired not only historical theories, but also legends, fiction, and myth. In the American imagination, Croatoan has become a kind of code word for disappearance itself. It has been used in books, TV shows, and films as a shorthand for the unexplained vanishing of people or things. That one word, carved in wood, has transcended its physical presence to become a part of cultural folklore, both tantalizing and terrifying in its ambiguity. It reflects the deep unease we feel when a story stops without ending, when a narrative trail ends in a single mark without an explanation. The settlers' disappearance might have faded into obscurity without this clue, but that word has kept the mystery alive, etched not just on wood, but into the memory of a nation. The absence of physical evidence surrounding the disappearance of the Roanoke colonists deepens the mystery even further. There were no bodies, no burnt structures, no bones buried in haste. There was no wreckage, no massacre site, no signs of conflict or evacuation. The village was dismantled in a calm and orderly way, suggesting that whatever happened was either voluntary or carefully executed. This absence of chaos has led many to believe that the colonists did not flee in terror or suffer a violent end. But if they left peacefully, where did they go, and why did they never return? The vacuum of evidence is like an echo that keeps bouncing through time, taunting, haunting, and always just out of reach. Archaeologists have returned to Roanoke time and time again, using newer and more advanced methods. From the early 20th century to today, researchers have combed through soil, sifted through relics, and used satellite imagery in search of traces that might answer these age-old questions. Though some artifacts have surfaced, European-style tools, pottery shards, and signs of temporary encampments, none have definitively been linked to the missing colonists. Their total disappearance, both physically and historically, defies logical explanation. In an age obsessed with record-keeping, it is almost unimaginable that an entire group of people could vanish without leaving behind even a single letter or diary page. Their silence is deafening. After a couple months, they are not deafening. This complete erasure from the historical record is one of the most haunting elements of the story. It's not just that we don't know what happened, it's that we don't even know what direction to look in. The lost colony remains a vacuum in time, where the normal flow of historical documentation and human memory seems to have collapsed. What remains is not a story with an ending, but a chilling absence of one. Their legacy is not written in words or monuments, but in their vanishing. So total and so silent that it forces us to question how much of history is built not on what we know, but on what we desperately wish we could understand. When John White returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, 3 years after leaving the colony in search of supplies, he found no signs of violence, no charred remains, no bodies, and no graves. The scene he encountered was strangely calm, almost too calm. The homes and fortifications had been carefully dismantled, not destroyed, suggesting that the colonists may have left in an orderly fashion. This absence of chaos immediately eliminated some of the most feared scenarios: massacres, wild animal attacks, or plague. Instead, what White found was an abandoned settlement that seemed deliberately taken apart, as if its occupants had intended to move elsewhere and start anew. Yet despite the apparent order in their departure, there was no information about where they went or why. There were no personal belongings, no journals, no messages explaining the sudden absence. The camp was stripped clean, devoid of signs of panic or struggle, which made the disappearance even more mysterious. The lack of any remains or human traces made historians and researchers uneasy. Typically, when communities face tragedy, disease, starvation, or attack, there are signs left behind. Graves are hastily dug, houses are burned or collapsed, tools are scattered. But here, none of that existed. It was as if the land had swallowed the people whole. Even in the worst historical disasters, humans leave some trace of their suffering. But Roanoke offered only silence. The absence of these expected signs introduced the possibility that the settlers may have left voluntarily, or at least under circumstances not marked by violence. It also complicated every effort to understand their fate. Without physical evidence, every theory, assimilation, migration, death, was equally unprovable. It's this void, more than anything, that has turned the story of Roanoke from a simple colonial footnote into a centuries-long enigma. What complicates this mystery further is the historical context in which these settlers disappeared. Life in the New World was brutal, unpredictable, and often fatal. Settlers faced disease, starvation, harsh winters, unfamiliar terrain, and tense relations with native tribes. Yet, most other early colonies, successful or failed, left behind written records, archaeological remains, or at the very least, oral histories. Roanoke left nothing. Even attempts to search nearby lands for survivors or evidence turned up nothing at the time. The colonists had either hidden themselves extremely well, been absorbed into another community completely, or had somehow vanished so thoroughly that no part of their existence remained. This deep and total erasure challenged not only the logic of the time, but also the assumptions of modern science and archaeology. It was not just a disappearance. It was an erasure of lives, voices, and experiences, leaving historians with a puzzle whose center had been cleanly removed. In many ways, the disappearance is made even more unsettling by the fact that no written messages were found. The settlers were instructed to carve a cross into a tree if they left under duress or danger. No such cross was found. Only the word Croatoan was carved, offering no indication of urgency or violence. This has led many to assume the colonists may have relocated willingly. Still, Even if the settlers were not in danger, why didn't they leave a more thorough message? They had paper, ink, and tools. They could have written a letter or marked a map. The absence of written communication from literate people is both baffling and haunting. It reinforces the idea that something silenced them completely, whether by design, necessity, or fate. It's not simply what was left behind that fuels the mystery. It's the overwhelming lack of what should have been there. Over time, the absence of evidence has become the most powerful element of the Roanoke story. It has fed centuries of speculation and driven countless investigations. The silence is so complete, so unrelenting, that it almost feels intentional. Whether nature reclaimed the colony or human hands dismantled and relocated it, the result was the same. A clean slate where a thriving settlement once stood. That quiet, that emptiness, continues to echo through history as a reminder that even entire communities can vanish without explanation, without closure, and without trace. Theories surrounding the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke have spanned generations and disciplines, with countless researchers, historians, and amateur sleuths attempting to decode what happened to the more than 100 settlers who disappeared without a trace in the late 1500s. In the absence of concrete evidence, speculation has flourished and various explanations have been proposed, some grounded in plausible historical context, others leaning into the realm of mystery and folklore. One of the most enduring theories is that the colonists assimilated with local Native American tribes, particularly the Croatoan people on nearby Hatteras Island. This idea is supported by the solitary carving of the word Croatoan found at the abandoned settlement and has been the focus of much anthropological and genetic investigation over the years. The possibility of integration seems logical, considering the settlers' increasing desperation for food, resources, and safety, and the likelihood that some tribes may have been more welcoming than others. However, if the colonists did assimilate, why has so little physical or cultural evidence surfaced to confirm it? Despite excavations on Hatteras Island and nearby areas, researchers have found only a few items of European origin: tools, pottery shards, and other artifacts, none of which definitively link to the Roanoke colonists. This leaves room for doubt. Could those items have been acquired through trade rather than direct integration? Or were they part of a small offshoot group rather than the entire colony? The lack of written records or oral histories from the tribes that mention a mass absorption of English settlers adds another layer of mystery. Still, some historians point to later accounts of Native Americans with gray eyes or fluency in English as indirect evidence that cultural merging did in fact occur. Other theories suggest that the settlers attempted to relocate but fell victim to the harsh environment. The coastal region of present-day North Carolina was wild and unforgiving, filled with swamps, dangerous wildlife, and unpredictable weather. Starvation, exposure, or disease could easily have claimed the lives of many if they had tried to move inland without adequate knowledge of the terrain. Some accounts speculate that the settlers may have split into smaller groups in a desperate attempt to survive, scattering their presence so widely that no single location retained enough evidence to mark their fate clearly. This possibility complicates the search for answers, as it disperses the focus across a wide geographic area, making it far more difficult for modern archaeologists to connect isolated findings to the lost colony as a whole. A darker theory involves conflict with hostile tribes. Relations between the English settlers and Native Americans were tense at best. Earlier attempts at colonization had been marred by violence and mistrust. It's possible that some of the settlers were attacked or killed, and the survivors either taken captive or fled into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Yet again, the mystery deepens because such an event would likely have left evidence: damaged structures, remains, signs of battle, all of which were conspicuously absent from the abandoned settlement. Some have argued that the colonists may have fled in anticipation of an attack, taking down their homes and attempting to escape before violence erupted. But if that were the case, why did no word ever reach John White or England? As we reach the storm door, John White or England, why did no survivor ever surface? Even more speculative ideas include supernatural elements or mass abduction, often inspired more by fiction than fact. Stories have emerged of a mysterious storm swallowing the settlers, or of strange lights in the sky. These are not serious academic theories, but they highlight how deeply the absence of answers has gripped the human imagination. When logic and science fail to provide clarity, myth rushes in to fill the void. In that way, the mystery of Roanoke has transcended history and entered folklore, becoming a canvas for both scholarly pursuit and fantastical speculation. Theories continue to emerge, shaped by evolving technology, cultural understanding, and the persistent desire to bring resolution to a centuries-old mystery. Yet, despite all the research, excavations, and debate, none of the theories have been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Each explanation offers just enough plausibility to be considered, yet each falls short of full confirmation. The disappearance of the Roanoke colonists remains an open question, with its many theories reflecting not only what we know about the past, but also the deep human need to understand, to explain, and to fill the empty spaces that history sometimes leaves behind. The lost colony of Roanoke is not only a historical puzzle, but a profound reflection of the fragile and often misguided efforts of early European colonization in the New World. The failure of this colony underscores the immense dangers and miscalculations made by those who attempted to transplant an entire way of life into a vastly different and largely unknown environment. These settlers, primarily English men, women, and children, embarked on their journey with dreams of opportunity and expansion, inspired by the vision of building a new English society across the Atlantic. But what awaited them was a land filled with unfamiliar climates, different cultural practices, limited resources, and complex relationships with the indigenous peoples who had inhabited those lands for generations. Their disappearance, therefore, is more than just a mystery. It's a symbol of how vulnerable and unprepared such colonial efforts often were when faced with the raw and unpredictable realities of the New World. The Roanoke colonists lacked sustainable food sources, and the support they expected from England was delayed due to the Anglo-Spanish War, particularly the attack of the Spanish Armada in 1588. With no regular contact or supplies, the settlers were effectively abandoned in a hostile environment. This points to the broader issue of how disconnected and ill-supported early colonial efforts often were. Decisions made by those in power back in England rarely reflected the urgent needs of those on the ground. The entire expedition was deeply reliant on resupply missions and assumed loyalty from local tribes, many of whom had already become wary of European presence. Without strong leadership, logistical planning, or genuine alliances, the colony quickly found itself isolated, vulnerable, and increasingly desperate. This isolation played a central role in whatever fate ultimately befell them. Their situation also highlights the cultural arrogance that often accompanied European expansion. The assumption that the settlers could easily dominate the land and its people, establish structures, and impose their way of life was fundamentally flawed. The native tribes had their own complex societies, survival techniques, and deep-rooted knowledge of the land. Rather than learning from or partnering with these communities, many colonists arrived with superiority and suspicion, further alienating the very people who could have helped them survive. While there were moments of cooperation and mutual aid, distrust and miscommunication were frequent and damaging. Roanoke serves as an early example of what happens when colonization is pursued without true understanding or respect for indigenous cultures and ecological realities. Moreover, the disappearance of the colony reminds us of how quickly colonial ambitions could unravel in the face of adversity. The settlers were not soldiers or explorers alone. They were families, wives, husbands, and children, who had brought with them their tools, hopes, and English customs. The decision to bring families instead of just military personnel marked a transition toward permanent settlement. But this ideal of permanence was destroyed by the harshness of the environment and the settlers' inability to adapt quickly enough. Their total disappearance, devoid of any traceable legacy or recorded outcome, demonstrates how fleeting those dreams could be. Roanoke became not a model of colonial success, but a ghost town. An eerie symbol of what happens when ambition outpaces reality. The fate of the colonists also mirrors the broader colonial pattern of pushing into unknown lands with an overconfidence that ignored both the difficulties of the natural environment and the complexities of human interaction. Instead of building bridges, many early efforts, including Roanoke, built walls, either through force or fear. And when those walls crumbled under the weight of hunger, illness, and isolation, the colonies disappeared, often without even the dignity of a recorded ending. In Roanoke's case, there was no battlefield, no treaty, no farewell, just silence. Finally, the story of Roanoke forces us to reckon with how history is often shaped, not just by what happened, but by what we fail to record, understand, or preserve. The failure of Roanoke is not merely an isolated incident. It is a representation of the larger theme of colonization, built on uncertain foundations, vulnerable to the harshness of new worlds and the consequences of misunderstanding those who lived there long before ships from Europe arrived on their shores. The most chilling aspect of the Roanoke colony's disappearance lies not in what was found, but in what wasn't. The silence left behind was absolute. No bodies, no letters, no wreckage, no graves. In a world where history is usually pieced together from remnants, ruins, and records, the story of Roanoke stands apart because it lacks all of those things. That silence is not just a detail, it is the defining characteristic of the mystery. It's the kind of void that unsettles the imagination because even disaster usually leaves clues in its wake. In Roanoke, it was as if the colonists had simply stepped off the face of the earth. They didn't scream, they didn't run, and they didn't fight. Or, if they did, time erased every trace of it. The absence of noise in any form, written, spoken, or physical, is what continues to haunt the minds of historians and researchers alike. When John White arrived back at the colony in 1590, after being delayed by war and weather for nearly 3 years, he must have expected either a warm reunion or a visible catastrophe. What he found was neither. The buildings were dismantled rather than destroyed, suggesting a careful departure. The surrounding area was peaceful, not scorched or looted. There were no bloodstains or broken weapons, no ruined belongings. They were well torn up when just emptiness. And that emptiness continues to challenge our understanding of how people disappear. We live in a world where information, even from centuries ago, can be extracted from a bone fragment or a fragment of cloth. But Roanoke left nothing of the sort. There are no physical markers, no bodies to exhume, no written last words. That level of silence has caused frustration for scholars, but has also elevated the story to near legendary status, because in the absence of evidence, imagination takes over. Where facts are missing, stories multiply. Roanoke's silence has been filled with theories, folklore, and fiction, creating layers of mythology around the original disappearance. Yet despite the allure of speculation, the silence itself still stands, unbroken and profound. It's more than just a missing piece of history. It's a reflection of how history sometimes refuses to be known. Even modern science, with all its advances in archaeology, forensics, and genetics, has struggled to penetrate that silence. Artifacts discovered on nearby islands, like European tools or pottery, provide glimmers of connection but fall short of delivering certainty. In a time when we are accustomed to answers, the refusal of this mystery to yield one is deeply unsettling. There's something psychologically powerful about the absence of closure. Human beings are hardwired to seek patterns, to solve puzzles, to find endings. We mark graves, We record births and deaths. We keep letters and diaries to make sense of our lives. When a whole group of people disappears without doing any of these things, it shakes our confidence in the historical record. It calls into question the idea that everything can be known if we just look hard enough. Roanoke's silence challenges that belief directly. For centuries, historians have returned to the island again and again, asking the same question in different ways, hoping for a break in the silence. But the earth keeps its secrets. The trees, the soil, and the winds have offered no explanation. That silence also redefines what it means to be lost. The colonists were not just physically unaccounted for, they were lost from memory, lost from record, and eventually lost from the narrative of English colonial success. Their disappearance left a space that could never be filled, an empty chapter where a beginning existed but no middle or end. It's a kind of historical purgatory, a moment frozen in time, endlessly speculated on but never resolved. This silence, paradoxically, is what has given Roanoke its lasting presence in history. Other colonies failed and were forgotten. Roanoke failed and was remembered because of what wasn't there, because of what couldn't be explained. The lack of physical evidence, written accounts, or survivors means we are left only with absence. And it is this absence, this overwhelming void, that has become the true legacy of the Roanoke colony. It speaks louder than facts, louder than dates, louder than the ambitions that once fueled the voyage across the Atlantic. The silence left in Roanoke's place is not just a historical mystery, it is a ghost, and it continues to whisper across time, reminding us that not every story comes with an answer. The enduring mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke has continued to inspire relentless curiosity among historians, archaeologists, scientists, and the general public. The lack of answers has not discouraged investigation. Instead, it has fueled an obsession that has lasted for over 4 centuries. From the earliest colonial reports to modern archaeological digs using ground-penetrating radar and genetic analysis, researchers have tirelessly attempted to uncover even the smallest fragment of truth. The drive to know what happened to the Roanoke colonists has passed through generations, changing form with each advancement in science, yet always circling the same unanswered question: where did they go? Early on, explorers and settlers made occasional attempts to gather information, often relying on rumors from Native American tribes. Stories were passed along about white-skinned people living further inland, or tribes that had adopted English customs. These whispers were never confirmed, but they laid the foundation for future investigations. In the 19th and 20th centuries, amateur historians and treasure hunters descended upon Roanoke Island and Hatteras Island, digging in search of relics. Their finds were often inconclusive: small objects of European origin, bits of pottery, the occasional tool. But none were definitively tied to the lost colonists. Still, even the smallest discovery would ignite a new round of speculation, stretching the story further into the future. Modern archaeology has taken a more disciplined and scientific approach. Projects like the First Colony Foundation have brought in teams of professionals who use high-tech tools to search beyond the obvious. Techniques like soil analysis, remote sensing, and artifact dating have added sophistication to the search. Researchers have expanded their radius beyond Roanoke Island, considering the possibility that the colonists moved to other regions in small groups. Some evidence has been found on Hatteras Island: pieces of iron tools, copper rings, and other European objects. These findings have sparked excitement, but without concrete links to the exact group that vanished, they remain frustratingly ambiguous. They are possible clues, not proof. One of the most promising yet controversial avenues of investigation is DNA testing. Scientists have begun studying genetic material from local Native American descendants, hoping to identify traces of English ancestry. If even one descendant could be proven to share DNA with known Roanoke families, It could support the theory that the colonists assimilated into indigenous communities. But the effort is complicated. After centuries of intermarriage and displacement, tracing genetic lines to a specific group of people who disappeared in the 16th century is a monumental challenge. The results so far have been inconclusive, intriguing, but not definitive. Despite all this, interest in Roanoke has not waned. Instead, it has grown with each decade. The story appears in school textbooks, documentaries, novels, and podcasts. It's dramatized in television series and referenced in films. The mystery has become part of American cultural identity, not because of what we know, but because of what we still don't. Next, what we know already. In the 1780s, we learned that a great part of the historic castle identity still proceeds from what we still don't. That gap between fact and fiction has made the lost colony a symbol of unanswered questions, a reminder that history is not always written in stone. The more we search, the more the absence seems to matter. It's not just a historical question anymore, it's a psychological one. A need to bring resolution to a story that feels incomplete. The mystery has also taken on a deeply personal tone for many researchers. Some have dedicated decades of their lives to solving it. They comb archives, decipher maps, and dig through forest soil, not for glory, but for closure. For them, Roanoke isn't just a historical footnote. It's a wound that never healed, a puzzle that keeps them up at night. The continued efforts show that the story of Roanoke is not just about the past. It's about how people in the present relate to loss, uncertainty, and the human need for narrative completeness. Each new discovery, theory, or scientific tool brings a surge of hope. Maybe this time, the answer will finally come. Maybe this fragment of metal, or this old journal entry, or this faint genetic match will fill the silence. But the truth remains just out of reach, like something glimpsed through fog, always disappearing as one steps closer. The passion behind the search persists, driven by the haunting feeling that someone, somewhere, knows what happened, that the land, or the blood, or the bones, still hold the answer, waiting for the right hands to uncover it. The story of the lost colony of Roanoke is not just a tale of a vanished settlement. It is a powerful reflection of how certain historical events transcend their time and become symbols of deeper, universal questions. The disappearance of the colonists has become more than just a historical curiosity. It is now woven into the broader fabric of cultural identity, both American and global. Over the centuries, the story has evolved from a colonial mystery into a legend that reflects our collective fascination with the unknown, our fear of vanishing without a trace, and our deep psychological need for resolution. The fact that this story, based on so little concrete evidence, has remained alive for over 400 years, speaks to its emotional and symbolic power. The colony may be physically gone, but its legacy has become immortal in storytelling, speculation, and cultural memory. The name Roanoke has taken on a life of its own. It is no longer just the name of an island or a colony. It has become shorthand for disappearance itself. It evokes mystery, silence, and the unsolvable. It appears in movies, novels, and television series. It has inspired countless fictional retellings and interpretations, many of which blend history with elements of horror, supernatural forces, and conspiracies. In popular culture, Roanoke is often used to represent a kind of unspeakable vanishing, a haunting reminder that not everything can be explained. The mystery itself has become a story. The absence of facts has been filled in by imagination, giving birth to folklore that extends far beyond the original scope of the actual event. This transformation of a historical event into cultural mythology shows how societies cope with uncertainty. When the human mind is faced with questions that resist answers, it begins to construct meaning from what is missing. We are hardwired to find patterns, and when the patterns break, As they did at Roanoke, we create narratives to restore order. Over time, the settlers became not just individuals lost to time, but symbols of human fragility, ambition, and the limits of our understanding. In some ways, they represent all who have ever ventured into the unknown and never returned. They are every explorer who vanished, every shipwreck that was never found, every traveler whose story stopped mid-sentence. The story of Roanoke also raises questions about how we remember history and whose stories get remembered. While many early colonial efforts failed, most have been forgotten, buried under centuries of more successful settlements and expanding empires. But Roanoke has endured precisely because there was no conclusion. That lack of closure, ironically, gave the story more staying power than the tales of many colonies that actually survived. It invites endless re-examination, new interpretations, and emotional connection. It reminds us that sometimes what is lost is more powerful than what is found. This emotional weight gives the mystery a timeless quality. Every generation seems to rediscover Roanoke in its own way. For some, it is a symbol of resilience and survival. For others, it's a cautionary tale about overreach and cultural blindness. It offers space for both hope and dread, for imagination and evidence-based inquiry. Teachers use it to spark student curiosity. Writers use it to explore themes of isolation, identity, and vanishing. Researchers use it as a challenge, testing the limits of their tools and theories against the unyielding silence of the past. It has become a mirror that reflects back our own fears, ambitions, and hunger for truth. In a world that values facts and demands answers, the Roanoke story stands as a defiant mystery. Despite centuries of exploration, research, and technological advances, it continues to hold its secrets. That persistence makes it more than just a historical footnote. It becomes an active part of our cultural consciousness. It speaks to the enduring human desire to understand the past, to complete unfinished stories, and to connect with those who came before us. Whether we view the lost colony as a tragedy, a myth, or a challenge, its impact continues to ripple across time. The legacy of Roanoke is not written in monuments or books alone. It is written in questions, in wonder, in stories whispered over campfires and debated in classrooms. It is a legacy that reminds us that history is not always a straight line from beginning to end. Sometimes it disappears into the fog, leaving behind only the sound of waves, the rustling of trees, and the echo of a single word carved into wood. That legacy, though built on silence, continues to speak louder than many well-documented events ever could.